Hello everyone, I am Yochanan ben Zechariah, but you can just call me Saint John the Baptist. I was selected to review today's video. Hopefully all goes well. Now, I am told that we are to show the audience an introduction before we continue. Today I will be reviewing a theory by a channel named Morgue Official, where he explains why he feels Jesus is actually Satan. Let's see how this goes. Hopefully he has solid proof to back up his claim, because if not, then he better start begging for forgiveness.
The serpent in the garden was actually Jesus?
In Orthodox Christian and Jewish theology, the serpent in Eden is not Jesus. Instead, mainstream interpretation identifies the serpent as Satan, the devil, while Jesus is the one who eventually defeats him. I'll explain why momentarily.
Sometimes you have to turn things upside down to see them clearly. Let's talk about Numbers 21. The Israelites are wandering in the desert, whining about everything, and what does God do? He sends venomous snakes to bite them. But
mainstream biblical interpretation offers several reasons why this passage disproves a Jesus-Satan identity. The comparison Jesus makes in John 3:14 through to 15 is a typological parallel based on the action of being lifted up for salvation, not a claim that the two figures are the same being.
In John 3:14, Jesus says, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life."
This verse is often cited by theologians to demonstrate that Jesus is distinct from and victorious over Satan, rather than being the same entity. In the original account, Numbers 21, the bronze serpent was a type or prophetic symbol. It represented the curse of the poisonous snakes, the result of sin, being judged and rendered powerless. By being lifted up, Jesus was not becoming the serpent, Satan, but was taking on the penalty of sin, the snakebite, to destroy its power. Just as the bronze serpent looked like the source of death, but was actually the source of life, Jesus took on the likeness of sinful flesh, Romans 8:3, to pay the debt of sin. The serpent on the pole represented defeated evil. Looking at it meant acknowledging the judgment of that evil. The passage continues in John 3:16-17 to clarify that God sent his Son out of love to save the world. Theology distinguishes between the bronze serpent, a God-ordained remedy, and the ancient serpent, Satan, in Revelation 12-9. John 3:14 portrays Jesus as the one who removes the sting of the old serpent. John 3:14 does not identify Jesus as Satan. Instead, it utilizes the bronze serpent from Numbers 21 as a symbolic type to illustrate how Jesus defeats the works of the devil.
He tells Moses to make a bronze serpent on a pole, and if anyone looks at it, they'll be healed. So a serpent on a pole brings healing and life?
As I mentioned earlier, in Christian theology, the snake and the pole described in Numbers 21 and John 3:14 represent a prophetic parallel, type, for Jesus' crucifixion and the defeat of sin. This doesn't prove that Jesus was Satan in any way.
It flat out says that Christ is the bronze serpent. But remember, none of this is literal.
This is where you're wrong, because John 3:14 is generally understood as both a historical literal event, referring to Moses, and a theological metaphor referring to Jesus. The verse refers back to a literal event recorded in Numbers 21:4-9. According to the text, Moses physically fashioned a bronze serpent and placed it on a pole to provide a literal cure for Israelites who had been bitten by real, venomous snakes. When Jesus quotes this event in John 3:14, he uses it as a typology, a prophetic symbol where a past event foreshadows a future reality.
If the serpent in Eden represents Christ giving the knowledge that leads to life,
that's funny because the serpent of Eden does not represent Jesus. This concept is only found in Gnosticism. The Bible consistently identifies this serpent as Satan and a deceiver whose knowledge led to death, not life. Also, John 8:44, Genesis 3:14-15, Revelation 12-9, and 20-2, 2 Corinthians 11-3, and Romans 5:12-19 all debunk the idea that the Edenic serpent represents Jesus.
What does Jesus' own resurrection represent?
The Gnostic argument that the serpent in Eden is Jesus typically utilizes both a false premise and a bait-and-switch tactic. Jesus' death on the cross, the lifting up, does not represent the serpent giving life. It represents the defeat and judgment of the serpent. In summary, the argument relies on a false premise by misidentifying the result of the serpent's actions in Eden, and uses a bait and switch by confusing two entirely different biblical serpent symbols. Anyways, that about wraps up today's video. If any further questions, then feel free to let me know.